In this video I'm going to be painting this banknote. It's of a cyan deer. So I am using the recently put together travel kit. If you've not seen that video, I would leave a link to the description in the description box below. And I'm basically using 4 of the colours in that kit, which is a yellow, a burnt sienna, a blue and a Payne's grey. I started off with the yellow and the burnt sienna on the flank, and then I added some blue to that mix to really desaturate that colour. So this video is more of a talk through than a tutorial. It's not really a beginner level, it's more for improvers. This is how I paint usually when I'm painting for myself. Quite wet in wet. And I tend to put down a colour and then another colour and let them blend together on the paper. It's slightly unpredictable, which I enjoy. You get a lot of different shapes and random effects happening. And if you like them, it's good. You can keep them in the painting. And if you don't like them, you can cover them over or remove them or do something with them. So here I told myself to leave some white on the throat of the animal and then forgot. But that's okay, you can wet the area and blot it out with a tissue. So it's a bit of a myth that watercolor is very unforgiving and that once you make a mistake, that's it, it's ruined. A lot of things can be removed and replaced and redone, as we just saw there. And there will be a few mistakes coming up and I'll show you how I cope with them as I move along. So I'm painting now some shapes on the head. And again, we've got this quite desaturated brown colour. I put the colour in a neater form, a less dilute form on top of the head, and then diluted it from the side. There's a side angle shot to show just how wet I'm working. Now this is 200 GSM. I've been pleasantly surprised at how much water it can actually handle. Because it's quite a small size, it's 6 inches square, I think, 5 inches square. Yeah, it probably doesn't crinkle too much because it's quite a small area to paint on. Anyway, now I'm into a dark area. This will be the Payne's grey. So the light is coming from the rear and the top. So the animal is lighter and more colourful on the back and the flank, and it's darker, almost complete shadow on the front, where the legs are and the lower neck. So I'm getting those little dark details in here on the face. Now I don't paint in the traditional method where I do all the lights and then all the mids and then all the darks at the end. I just can't paint like that. I have to have some of the darks in as reference as I'm going along. So that was an example of where I fixed something I accidentally painted outside the line. So I simply blotted it out with some tissue. Okay, so back to adding more shadow. And you can manipulate what you've done as it's on the paper. So even though this is a very dark colour that's going on, you might think it's a point of no return. But I do actually come back in and lighten this with some water. I got a background there on the top of the head, which I did not like. So I dampened my brush and I softly scrubbed it out. So yeah, even as the paint dries, it's still possible to change it and manipulate it. And at the end of the day, if something is really awful, you can paint. You can let it dry completely and paint over it, or just start the whole painting again. So I am painting. I'm looking for shapes, value shapes, and colour shapes in my reference imagery. So I'm not thinking, oh, I'm going to paint the cheek now, I'm going to paint the chin. I'm thinking, oh, here's some dark brown, I'll put that here. Here's some lighter brown, I'll leave that there. So one area that does need to be dark is here, under the the mouth part and the cheek part along the neckline, because this really helps to separate the shape of the head and the neck from the main body, the body area. So that's a very dark brown, which is a mix of burnt sienna and Payne's grey. So we're getting a lot of browns here, and most of those are basically yellow plus burnt sienna by itself, or both of those two mixed with some blue to make different shades of brown, and then the very dark areas are Payne's grey. The very dark brown areas are Payne's grey plus burnt sienna. All of this is being done with a synthetic round. It's number 7 or 8. And as I said, this was my little travel sketchbook, which is 5 or 6 inches square. I think it's 6 inches and 200 GSM. Okay, so as you can see, although there we go, lightening some of the dark there with a bit of clean water and a damp brush. So my basic technique. Oh, let's have a look at this close up before I go into that. So notice that if I touch the paper quite gently with a brush, it releases paint from the brush, and if I press down a bit, it sucks it back up. So that's something that you can practice. Touch lightly to get paint onto the paper, press down to remove, to get paint from the paper into the brush. So yeah, so my basic process is to start off with some simple washes, let them blend together, and then start to add in details as I go along and gradually refine what I have. I tend to work on one area and then let that dry, or at least dry a little bit, and then move on to another area, and so on. So you kind of get a feel for it in the end, where you can work and where you cannot work. Again, some more dark now on the flank. It does take practice, this technique, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. And sometimes that means you have to let it dry and paint over, and sometimes it means you have to start the whole thing again. So it's not for those who are very concerned about getting everything done properly in one painting. It's not experimental exactly, but it does mean that you will have a few failures. But as you go along and do it more often, you get more success than failure, and of course you learn each time you do a painting. I'm doing the eye now. Switch to my rigger brush. This is Payne's grey, and negative painting around the eye to leave a white highlight. And I slightly dampen the brush, pull some of that very dark tone underneath it to give a very grey edge to the eye. And so quite often I will use a damp brush to pull paint from one area into a clear area of the paint. Rigger brush again, I'm painting the horns, starting off with some yellow, slightly desaturated, and then still slightly wet, and I'm going straight in with this dark mix. So I've got a couple of wells on my palette which are full of paint mixes, so as you go along into the painting you can just keep reusing those, which is helpful because it's more harmonious to just stick to those few colours. Keep introducing extra colours all the way along, it starts to look a bit jarring, a bit not as appealing to the eye. Now painting the edge of the ear. So I'm effectively doing my drawing, my pencil drawing. I'm going over the pencil lines with some dark paint, which will be paint's grey, or the Sienna style colour, or very dark blue. Whatever happens to be available at the time. I put some dark on the underside of the horns to give them more of a shape. Don't forget the left-hand side of the animal is mostly shadow. A few more details on the head area. Starting to tighten up the details now. So there's the nose. Quick flick of a dark colour and damp brush to lift a little bit of that out. And then back to the dark. To put the dark paints, to put in the deeper details. So a very quick process to get a nice little detail like the nose. And then some more dark areas, that's the mouth area. And a few more lines to really make the muzzle area come to life. So I think I went a bit too dark really at this point, so I'm trying to rescue it with some of the red-brown colour, the Sienna. This area is dry now, and so this is a dry brush action. And then I'm just softening the harder lines on the bottom edge of that area. So let's brought some colour back. Make sure I get some on the head as well to unify the paint. And then another reason that I did all that was to wet the paper again so that I could blot out some areas to give the effect of white or cream coloured dots, the markings on the flank of the deer. So here at this side of the painting it's still very dry. So I had to wet the paint on little white dots and then blot them out. If your paper's wet, you can just use tissue paper to blot. If your paper's dry, you're going to have to paint on some wetters with your brush first. Now here I went a bit overboard, accidentally blotted out some areas I didn't want, but because it's still so wet, I can just scribble them back in with the brush. And here I'm doing the same. I'm taking the damp brush and pulling some of the dark areas around the edge of the ear into the inner ear. And the final section of the painting is to re-establish some deep shadow, especially here under the head and along the neckline and on the very underside of the deer, the body. I put the paint on quite thick, quite creamy, and then I tend to cream my brush and dampen it and soften that hard, darker edge. And don't forget that it's blending in with the colours that are already on the paper, which are not lifting off because they have dried, or they're virtually dry. Let's just soften that area off and we're pretty much done. So all in all, I'm reasonably happy with it. It's slightly overworked, I think. But it's a nice little sketch exercise. That's what sketchbooks are for, right? Don't be afraid to make a mess. It's still quite a nice painting. There we go. Hope you enjoyed that. See you next time.